Before we get started into the actual program tonight about talking about the bees themselves, last week I talked about the importance of joining a club or going to conferences and local state conferences, learning about bees. One thing I neglected to talk about was how important it is to have a mentor if you can find one. Back when I started beekeeping, I didn't know anything about honeybees. I didn't know where to go for help. And I was talking to my mother and I said, told her, I think I'm gonna start keeping bees. And my mother said, well, why don't you call Jerry? He still has bees. Now, Jerry was a man named Jerry Ely, and I grew up next to him as a kid. And all I knew was he was a guy my dad's age, and he had bees, and he sold honey in his driveway. That's all I knew. But here I was in my 40s, and he was still keeping bees. So I called him, and he was so gracious, and he said, sure, come on over. And I spent the better part of 2 years, almost every weekend, going to his house and working his colonies with him. And he was an unpretentious man. He was very patient, very kind. He taught me everything nice and slow and let me work the hives and told me what I was looking at. And that probably got me further ahead in my beekeeping than if I'd have just done it on my own, over the course of 10 years. He saved me years worth of beekeeping. And what I learned about Jerry later on in life was that he was Pennsylvania's first EAS master beekeeper. He traveled all over the world keeping bees. And he was just, he was a man that didn't go around talking about it. And that impressed me because not only was he my mentor, taught me everything, and his patience and knowledge, but I say he gave me a gift. And that's when I got further along in my beekeeping to the point where I became a master beekeeper and I started teaching. I said, I'm going to take that gift that he gave me and I'm going to keep giving it to people going forward. And I think in Jerry's career, he probably taught thousands of people to keep bees, hundreds for sure, and I'm approaching those numbers now. And I think it's important that you find that mentor. They're going to save you a lot of mistakes. They'll be your friend. They'll teach you the things you need to know because they want you to be successful. Nobody wants to fail in this. I don't want any other beekeeper to fail. We're like a fraternity together. We're out to help each other. So in addition to everything I told you last week about where to go to learn about bees, reading, YouTube, conferences, clubs, if you can find a mentor that will come and help you work in your bee yard or his bee yard or her bee yard, it's really important because all of the other methods of education, there's no substitute for hands-on training. So just one more thing. So with that said, we're going to get started tonight. We're going to talk today about the bees themselves. Last week we talked about why we want to keep bees. Today we're going to talk about what they actually are. What is a hive comprised of? Which bees are in there? I'm sure most of you know, yeah, there's a queen, there's drones, there's workers, but what is their function in the colony? Well, to start out, bees are very social insects. They work together. And I always say they function as an organism. Even though they have their individual jobs, together it's like one organism in what they do. So we're going to cover all of that. I call it the cast of characters and their life cycle, where they live, how they live. Honeybees are cavity dwellers. In the wild, we see bees living in trees. We find them living in old houses without insulation, where there's that space between the interior wall, exterior wall. Anything with a cavity they can live in to make their nest, their brood chamber, and store honey. We as beekeepers, of course, we're going to put them in a hive, which is going to kind of simulate that wild environment where they would normally make a nest. So what is in our hive? Which bees are in there? First, we're going to talk about the queen. There's almost all the time, there's only one queen in the hive. There are occasions where you'll have two in there, but that's a very special event and it's very short term. So we're going to just say there's one queen in the colony. That queen has one job and one job only. Her job is to lay eggs, and she lays a lot of eggs. In the busy season, she can lay up to 2,000 or more eggs in a day. In the slow season, she'll cut way back. She generally will lay almost all year round. She might shut down for a few weeks, and end of December, beginning of January, she'll stop laying for a very short period of time. And when she starts again, she might only lay a few eggs a day. And as spring comes, she builds up. And the things that stimulate a queen to lay eggs is a nectar flow. It's all, it's all nature, how nature works. The nectar, the trees start to bloom, the flowers bloom, the bees bring in nectar, feed it to the queen, and it stimulates her to lay a lot of eggs. Now, what is a queen? Why is a queen different than the other bees? She's just a female bee too, just like the worker bees are females. When an egg is laid, a fertilized egg, and it hatches, for the first 3 days, they all get what's called royal jelly. Royal jelly comes from a gland in the worker bee's head, and they feed every larva royal jelly for 3 days. At the end of 3 days, if that bee is destined to become a worker, they stop feeding it royal jelly and switch to bee bread. A queen will get royal jelly for all 6 days of her larval life. And what that does is it causes her reproductive organs to develop. So that's how we get a queen. She's bigger than worker bees, and she has a special cell. Most of the worker cells are horizontal, where a queen, she's bigger, and so they build a cell that hangs down. It's a vertical cell. When we look at nature itself, there's always protections in various ways to make sure that everything is successful. It's no different in a hive. When the bees need to make a queen, because they make the queens, the worker bees do, when they need to make a new queen, for whatever reason, whether the current queen is failing, or she got killed somehow, or they are preparing to swarm, which is a natural reproductive act, they'll start raising queens. They don't raise one, because if they raised one queen, there's a good chance that that queen, that cell may not develop. She may die in the cell, you never know. So they'll raise a lot of queen cells. They might raise 10, 15 of them in a hive. And as those cells are being fed royal jelly and developing, and they start to pupate, and they become adult queens in the cell, when they start to emerge, they start doing something called piping or pipping, which is a vibration they make, and the other queens feel it, and they vibrate back. The first queen that emerges seeks out, she'll keep doing that piping, and when one answers her, her sister, she will follow that, find that other queen that maybe has not emerged from her cell yet, because they emerge based on the same time. So when that egg was laid, 16 days later, she'll emerge. So the first one that emerges will find her sister, she'll chew a hole in the side of the cell, and she'll kill them all. In the event that two queens hatch almost at the same time, they'll do that same thing. They'll pipe back and forth, they'll find each other in the colony, and then they'll fight each other to the death. They'll sting each other until only one queen is left. Now, just an FYI, queens only sting other queens. They will not sting you and I. So that's kind of interesting about the queens. Now, when that queen has killed all of her rivals and she's the only queen in that colony, at that point she's a virgin. She has not mated yet. Queens mate once in their life. So when she emerges, she hangs around the hive for a few days, and after a few days, she'll take little flights to orient herself to her colony, her hive, because that's where she's going to come back to. Probably 5, 6, 7 days out after emerging, she'll go out on her mating flight, and she'll fly out looking for a drone congregation area, which is exactly what it sounds like, where the drones hang out. She'll go flying by, and the drones that are hanging out waiting for a virgin queen will start chasing her. As they start to catch her, it looks almost, if you ever see it, it looks like a comet. You've got this one little queen in front, and then some drones, and the further back you go, the wider it gets, more drones. They start chasing her. The fastest drones will catch her first. As the first drone approaches, she opens her sting chamber, he mates with her, and he's done. I'll get to the drones a little bit later, what happens to them. So he mates with her. As he goes away, the next drone mates with her. And that happens, recent studies have shown that could be 15, 20 different drones. And you think, well, why is she mating with that many drones? Number one, genetic diversity, right? We want to get a lot of genetic diversity into that queen, and to make sure that, they're viable. You could have a drone that may be not viable. So she mates with a lot of drones, and when she's done mating for the day, she goes back to her colony. Now, mating with all those drones, she may have taken in as much as 80 million sperm cells. because she's only mating that one time, and she has to get all the semen in her body that she'll need for the rest of her life. She'll take in about 80 million sperm cells. She'll go back to the colony. The most viable sperm will make its way up into a gland in her body called the spermatheca. About 5 million sperm cells will go in there. The most viable ones will make it there and go in. The rest is expelled from her body. At that point, our queen has all the semen she'll ever need. She has all the eggs she'll ever need. And as she'll start laying in a couple of days after she mates. And when she lays her eggs, she goes from cell to cell. Now we have two different types of cells, sizes. We have a smaller cell that's for the worker bee, and we have a larger cell for the drones because they're bigger bees. She'll first go in and check, make sure that cell has been cleaned out. And if it's clean and ready for her to lay in, then she measures it. She goes in, she measures it. By measuring it, she knows what she has to lay in there, a drone or a worker. What is the difference? A worker egg, as she lays that egg in the cell, she fertilizes it. She releases some semen to fertilize that egg. A drone egg, she does not fertilize. So when you think about it, it's kind of strange. A drone comes from an unfertilized egg. So a drone has no father, but he's got a grandfather. You can think about that after the talk. So that's a queen's life, and she does that day in, day out. As I said, she can lay as much as 2,000 eggs a day, down to a few in the late season, and then picks back up the next spring. And she'll be in that hive until either she starts to fail and the bees replace her, or she gets killed, or she swarms. So that's what a queen's job is. The next bee we're going to talk about is the drone bee. Drones are male bees. What is their job? Nothing. They don't do a thing other than mate with a virgin queen. They don't do any work in the colony. They don't even feed themselves. They're the worker bees. Their sisters feed them and take care of them. And every day, in the mating season, which is like, fairly early spring until it could be as far as late summer, they'll leave that colony and they'll fly out to that drone congregation area. Now the thing about drones is they don't persist over the season. Since queens can only mate in that spring to late summer time frame, there's no need for drones year round. So they don't persist through winter. There's no drones in the colony in the winter time. The queen will decide in spring that she needs them, that's when she raises them, and then she'll stop raising them when we get toward fall. But they will go out to this drone congregation area. It's an area that persists year over year. I don't believe they figured out how the drones pick that area, but the drones will go there, they'll fly there, and they'll just circle around waiting for a queen to show up. Most of the time she doesn't show up, and they go back. Drones are the only bee that can go to any hive in your apiary. Any other bee that tries to go in a different colony will be pushed out by the guard bees in that colony. But drones can go anywhere. So drones are there from spring. You'll start seeing the bees start to raise drones. Summer they'll be there. Fall you'll start seeing less and less until eventually you see none. And the reason being, if they can't mate with a virgin queen in the fall or winter, all they are is a drain on the colony. So the sisters, the worker bees who took care of them all year and fed them, suddenly start pushing them out of the colony and not letting them back in. And so they'll starve to death. That's one way the drone's life is ended. The other way is back where I talked about mating with the queen. When a drone flies up into the queen and she opens her sting chamber and he mates with her, his reproductive organs are immediately ripped from his body and he falls to the ground dead. So I always say drones have a great life till the very end. So that's a drone's life. Now we're going to talk about the workers. And they're called workers for a reason. They do all the work in the colony. Worker bees are females. They are the same as the queen, except they've only had that royal jelly for 3 days, so their reproductive organs did not develop. So they're females, and they have a set list of tasks they do as they age. As they get older, their jobs change. I said they function as an organism. When you hatch, you know what your job is, and as you get older, your job changes. Nobody has to tell you. It's just instinct. You go from job to job to job. When they first emerge, they're what we call housekeeping or cleaner bees. Their job is to go to those cells, clean the cells out, and polish them. The reason why they have to clean them, when a bee emerges from a cell, it leaves something behind that we call it frass. It's left in the bottom of the cell, and the queen can't lay in there till it's clean. So the worker bees, the cleaner bees, will go into that cell, they'll clean all the frass, they'll polish it up and get it ready for the queen. After a few days of doing that, their job changes and they become nurse bees. When they're nurse bees, that gland that I talked about before, the hypopharyngeal gland, starts to function, starts to produce royal jelly. The nurse bees need to consume bee bread in order to produce royal jelly. So they will start producing royal jelly and they will feed the larvae, the developing larvae. Now larvae are there for 6 days, so they need to be fed several thousand times a day because they grow exponentially. They go from something you can't hardly see with your naked eye to a big white grub before they're capped over to pupate. So they feed those bees, and that's their job as a nurse bee. Once they get past that stage, that gland stops functioning and their wax glands start to function. They start to shed wax scales. What do they do with that? They cap the honey, the ripe honey that's ready to be capped. They build comb. When you put if you've seen honeycomb, they don't buy that. The bees have to make that. So it takes a lot of bees to make that comb. So they start shedding wax scales, they'll bring it up and they'll chew it and they'll put it in place and make those hexagonal cells. So that's what the next stage of life is when they're shedding those wax scales. One of the other things they do in that period is they start to pack pollen. When the bees bring pollen into the colony, they put it in the cell, and these worker bees are packing it into a cell and mixing it with a little nectar so it turns into bee bread. Bees don't actually consume pollen, they consume bee bread, which is pollen and nectar that's gone through some enzymatic changes. So they do the pollen packing, they do the honey capping, they do the honeycomb building. Another thing they do is they do fanning. They dry the honey out. When bees bring back nectar and put it into a cell, nectar's about 80% water. Well, honey's about 18% water. So the only way to get it down to that 18% is to fan it, cause evaporation. And that's what they do there. After that job, they could be doing some other jobs like undertaker bees. An undertaker bee is one that when a bee dies in the colony, instead of it laying on the bottom of the colony, some bee comes in there and it takes it out to the entrance, and they'll try to carry it as far, a little bit away from the hive so they don't bring predators into the hive, attract, any sort of skunks or any other predators by that smell of those bees. So they take it away from the colony. That's what an undertaker bee does. The next progression they make is something called guard bees. Now, I probably don't have to explain what a guard bee does, but a guard bee, they're on the entrance to the colony, lined up there. They're also at the top when you take the lid off. Those are the bees that are going to challenge you when you go into the hive. Not only us, but other predators coming into the hive. If skunks come there, the guard bees are the ones go after them, or anything else coming at the hive. Additionally, they challenge bees from other colonies. If a worker from a colony next to them tries to come into their colony, they'll just push that bee out. They'll tumble around. They won't kill it. They won't kill each other. They'll just push them out. So they are guarding the colony from both other bees and from predators, and we are included in that predator list. So that's why we, as beekeepers, we have smokers and tools to mask that. But that's what a guard bee does. That's its next to the last job, is being a guard bee. The last job they get is becoming a forager. And what does a forager do? Forager flies out and looks for resources for the colony. What resources do colonies need? 4 things: pollen, nectar, water, and propolis. So bees will go out and they forage for one thing. Any particular bee doesn't go out, I'll get some nectar, then I'm going to go do pollen. They don't do that. If their job today is going to get pollen, that's all they'll do. If it's going to gather nectar, that's what they'll do. When it comes to pollen, they find a good source of pollen to bring back. They need pollen and nectar to raise brood, so they'll constantly get as much pollen as they can get. They'll bring that back and give it to the pollen packers. If they're foraging for water, they use water, in feeding the brood. They also use it to cool the colony. Colonies can get very warm in the summertime. They don't have air conditioning. So how do they cool it? They spread water on the inside of the colony on the frames, and then they fan at the entrance, and it causes an airflow to go up through the colony, and it's like an air conditioner. It cools it down, because we don't want our temperatures to get over like 103 or so. Brood starts to die, 103, 104. The normal temperature in a colony is about 98 degrees all the time. And so they regulate it. They don't have a way to thermoregulate themselves, so they use water to do that. The other thing they gather is something called propolis. Propolis is plant and tree resins that the bees bring back, and they coat the inside of the colony with it, the hive bodies, the frames, because it has antifungal and antimicrobial properties. That allows the bees to keep diseases down in the colony. It's a very important aspect of what they do. And we as humans use propolis. I'm sure some of you have seen propolis tinctures, and because of those antifungal, antimicrobial properties, they help us. Well, the bees, it helps them as well. And they gather a lot of that. The one thing I didn't talk about yet was the nectar. Bees use nectar for several things. Raw nectar in nature is a compound sugar, it's sucrose, same as our white table sugar. Bees use sucrose to stimulate the queen to lay eggs and to make honey. They take that sucrose into their honey stomach, they mix it with an enzyme called invertase, which breaks it down into two simple sugars, glucose, fructose. That's honey. Bees don't raise brood off of honey, they raise brood off of nectar. Honey contains, when honey is fully dried out and ripe, as we call it, it consists about 95% glucose, fructose, about 5% sucrose that hasn't been inverted, so they can raise very, very little brood off of honey. They need nectar to raise brood. So they bring that nectar in when they're raising brood, and they're bringing it in to make honey. Honey the colonies use to keep alive. They can stay alive on honey, to eat it, but they can't raise a lot of brood off of it. So they use it to put weight on the colony, to store honey to get through wintertime, and they use it to raise brood. Now, when it comes to foraging, I guess I would call it, bees are monofloral. And I always relate it to us at a buffet. When we go with our family to a buffet, we go up to the buffet, and there might be 30 things on there, but there's one that's really good. And we go back to the table, we say, hey, try this, it's really good. The bees do the same thing. They want to look for that nectar source that has the highest sucrose content. So when they do that, when a bee will go out and they'll find a good high sucrose content nectar somewhere, some flower or tree or a weed, they will take that into their honey stomach. They come back to the colony, and they will do what's called bee dance. It's either the circle dance or the waggle dance, depending how the distance of the nectar. And they'll go in that colony, complete darkness, on a frame, and they'll start doing a dance where they waggle their back end, they buzz, and they do a circle. They'll do a circle, and they'll come down through it in some direction. Depends what direction they're going. You know, they're one of those directions like that. And what they're doing is they're triangulating where that nectar source is from the position of the sun, the colony, and the nectar source. And they do it so exact by that vibration, and they let their sisters taste that nectar that they have and continue to dance. And that vibration they feel in that darkness tells them exactly where it is. It could be 1.5 miles, 2 miles away, and the rest of the foragers in that colony that are gathering nectar that day will go exactly to that spot like nothing. It's very amazing, it really is. But that's what they do. And that's when bees die, is in the foraging stage, because what they actually do is wear out their wings. So they're flying back and forth, bringing one of these resources back in, and eventually they've just worn their wings out and they drop where they are. Might be in the colony, might be in the field somewhere. So I talked about being a cleaner bee, a nurse bee, a pollen packer, a honey capper, an undertaker, a fanner, a guard bee, and a forager. All those jobs in the summertime take place in the span of somewhere 4 to 6 weeks. So it's a very short lifespan for them. Our summer bees don't have a lot of fat bodies. Bees don't consume fat, they make their own fat bodies. In the summer bees, they don't have a lot of fat bodies. They're only made to live for that period of time. They're continuing to raise new bees, so there'll be new foragers eventually. But they have that lifespan of 4 to 6 weeks. Well, how do they get through winter? Our winter bees are different. Our winter bees are consuming honey, and honey, when they consume honey, they make their own fat bodies. So those bees have the ability to live 6 months or more through winter. So our fall bees, August, September, October, those bees are physiologically slightly different than our summer bees, and they're not foraging, so they're not wearing out their wings. They're the ones that are going to live through winter for us and kickstart that colony come spring. And that's an important thing to remember as we go forward, because we need to make sure as beekeepers that our colony going into fall and winter is extremely healthy, because that's what's going to get us to our next year. And further on down in these talks, we may get there in this class, we may not, but we'll do more. Some of you that were on last week I know are already keeping bees. Some of you are going to be brand new to it. Some of you have been keeping bees a year or two. And what I see a lot is people are struggling keeping their bees alive. So I'm going to do another Facebook Live, probably a 3 to 4 part, and it's about keeping your bees alive and being successful, being sustainable in your beekeeping. It's not easy if you have no help, but if you learn a few easy things to do, you can easily become a sustainable beekeeper where you're not losing all of your bees every winter and having to start over again. And that's the biggest thing I see with new beekeepers, where they're struggling. So I've had some requests to do that one, and I think we're going to do that one as well. And that'll make you, if you are a beekeeper, I think it'll make you a better beekeeper. So that's all I have for tonight. If you have any questions, like I said, post them. For those of you who may be new to Man Lake, there's some of you that have known us for quite a while, some of you might be new. We have several stores throughout the country. We've got them in Woodland, California, Texas, Winter Haven, Florida, Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, Kentucky, Hackensack, Minnesota. Didn't think of the 2 cities there. But if you're near one of our stores, you can always stop in and ask somebody if you're having an issue with your bees. We're always there to help you with any questions you might have. Because like I said, it's as much fun as beekeeping is, and as much enjoyment as you get out of it, it can be kind of frustrating when you lose your bees. So with that, I would say that's it for tonight. If you got questions, let us know. We have a lot of resources on our website, a lot of education out there. There's some classes online there, and go to the Man Lake website, manlakeltd.com, and you can look under the education. There's some videos there, and I think we have a blog there. So additional information there. I'm not sure if there's a spot there yet to post questions, but we may do that as well. So use your resources, whether it be us, whether it be your clubs, whether it be your mentors. Use them and become great beekeepers, because I'll tell you, there's nothing like it.